بسم الله والحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله. ربنا زدنا علما وتقوى وبارك في أوقاتنا وفي أقوالنا وفي أفعالنا. أما بعد, the party and others, and she was talking about how there was a lack of self-care and spiritual grounding. And she gave some examples of how some people back in the days so involved in that process. She gave the example of how some people back in the day were involved in that process. They were involved in the things like yoga and so on and so forth. There's some activists that I met which shall go unnamed, and the same thing was brought up, the whole issue of the lack of self-care, the lack of spiritual base. And one in specific was talking about how that was the downfall of a lot of activists in the past, the lack of the spiritual base. And this actually, interestingly enough, this issue of discussion that is in a lot of circles is the issue of contemplation versus action. You find that in some circles is kind of dealt with that theme. It is the theme that addresses that issue, the contemplation versus action. So some people, they consider that being engaged in the world, so to speak, that's kind of where they find their sense of spiritual accomplishment and their sense of connecting with some higher meaning. I'm speaking in general languages because not everybody that is on my Facebook is Muslim, and not everybody is, interested in religion, so to speak, but they may be interested in some other angles of this. And so I find that, the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam is very interesting how, this is a meditation that I've been having for the past 2 weeks now. I find it very interesting that the Prophet, before he began his mission, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that he retreated from the world. And there, he gained the sense of perspective, and then he went back into the world. And then that practice stayed with him throughout time in one way or another, whether it was nightly prayers or whether it was, actually going into retreat or itikaf. I think that the reality of where most of us are at right now, that the level of anxiety, lack of self-fulfillment, angst, not knowing what the heck is going on, all of those feelings a lot of times have to do with not being still. And so there's going to have to be a level of stillness which people reach if they're able to keep it together. Recent times, I talked to an activist about that, and the person that I talked to admitted that, I need to get back to my program of self-care in that regard. And I want to say something else that is not only an issue, because I'm throwing the word self-care around a little loosely, and I kind of know what I mean, but, self-care has a number of different meanings. Like, within the healthcare profession, self-care has its certain sets of meanings. And then, we add on to it the spiritual development side, the side that we talk about as committed Muslims. That's the side of, having some sort of conversation with Allah, having some sort of time with Allah. There's no doubt that needs to take place. I think all of us know that, but the conversation that we don't have enough are the obstacles which stop us from getting there. There's some activists that they were people of fasting, there were people of salah, there were people of dhikr, there were people of spiritual development and continuity, and things happen. Hardships come and kind of create the obstacle. Create the obstacle to going to the higher level, and they stay stuck. This is a bad example, but it's just such a good example. It's a bad example to use, but in kung fu movies, there's always that Shaolin master who, he's the drunk monkey guy, and he went through something, and he lives on the outskirts, and he really doesn't live with the community, and he's a master of martial arts, but something happened in his life, and he just drinks his problems away. Although overall, he's committed to some sense of righteousness. He has some sort of vice that he holds on to kind of maintain with the tragedy of the world. That's why I said it's just like such a bad example, but it's such a good example at the same time. It's such a good example from the angle of what? And this is where I remove the contradiction, because there's an angle to this. So because sometimes it happens. I've talked to people that have been in social services and this and that, and they say, the deeper you go in dealing with people and dealing with their struggles, it gets intense. And so if you don't know how to channel that stuff, you find yourself wilding out, so to speak. You find yourself drowning in a particular vice or whatever it may be. And, it may, some people immediately, if they're like the holy roller types, they're thinking of like major sins, this and that. But no, it can even be like, you can be the type of person that is just like, you zone out. Like what you do is just eat. You eat your way out of the issue. A lot of people don't like to throw that example in, but that becomes an issue. So, but the point, that I wanted to make here is that, yeah, that happens. Like sometimes people are stuck. And it's not that they don't know that self-care is important. It's not that they don't know that the spiritual dimension is not important. Sometimes that's very much known and clear. But sometimes it's just the tragedy of life is such that how you maintain a balance is by having imbalance within yourself. That for people is an extremely problematic statement. I know. But when you deal with people, you see it. You see it. There's some very good people, that is where they're at. You know what I'm saying? They have their thing that they do, and it kind of just, it's a cathartic moment. It's that cathartic moment, and it's not the best. It's tragic. And a lot of that comes from not having supportive environments. Sometimes that comes from you yourself too, not having the outlet that you need when you're tending to the needs of everyone else. And you see that especially in people that are in the service profession, so to speak, where they're servicing people overall. You see that that's kind of what happens. And so in any event, there's something that I just want to close off with. And I want to close off with saying that, look, we live in a time period of madness. And there's such a thing that's called self-compassion. Self-compassion. And somehow, some way, you have to have some compassion with yourself to allow yourself to experience that peace that can only come from Allah. And that is a journey. It's a journey. Those who have been on the path of kind of like spiritual development and growth, they know the levels, the obstacles, the challenges. They know that it's not easy. And so, but still the compassion part comes that sometimes you have to give yourself the medicine in order to maintain and operate at a higher level. Right. And this is more encouraging for those people who are there. They're confronting that obstacle and they need that push. They need to remind themselves of that. They need that push. And I'm telling you, it's like we're burning out. We are burning out. And part of it is because we have orientations which have issues. We're burning out. we're not finding solidarity with each other. We're not finding cooperation with each other. We're not finding real community. And sometimes what happens, especially, that's why Frantz Fanon is so important, because he deals with the psychology of the oppressed. Sometimes when you're dealing with people that are broken, burned, and this and that, is that what they give you back, they fight you in the process. And you're not trying to come in and liberate them. You're not trying to be the savior. You're there walking with them hand in hand. But sometimes the people that are the closest are the ones that they attack the most. And we've witnessed that over and over again. Sometimes to get over, and to survive, people will step on everybody's body and neck to make sure that they're the ones that come out on the top of the ship, because as they're trying to escape the hell that's on the bottom of the ship, and we know the ship is sinking, they don't have a problem with stepping on everybody's neck, even if it means cracking a few necks. They don't have a problem with breaking a few arms, as long as they make sure that they get out. And sometimes that's what happens in the spiritual, psychological struggle or survival phase that people are in, that they will tear apart anybody that comes close to them and shows them any sense of love. And if you're on the receiving end of that, if you're an empath, this is for the empaths. If you're an empath, and that's what you go through as an empath, you need to take a break. You need to take care of yourself, because I'm gonna be honest with you, and I'm gonna be very honest with you, and I'm gonna say something a lot of people are not gonna like. Some people just don't give a damn. They will burn you. They will tear you apart. And no matter how much your intention of goodness is, if you don't have, and this is not an issue even of selfishness. Selfishness is not what we're talking about. We're talking about justice. We're talking about being just with yourself, which is different than selfishness. It's different than going out for yourself. We're not talking about this Eurocentric, be for yourself first. We're not talking about that type of approach. We're talking about trying to go to the higher level. The Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and I'll drop it with this. I'll leave with this. The Prophet went from the cave of Hira, where he just escaped for a little bit, and he knew everybody's pain. He understood what was going on. He understood the social breakdown. He encounters Allah. Allah tabaraka wa ta'ala puts him on this program of, who are you? And he has to read, and he has to come to this understanding of who the human being is and in the place of the world. And he struggles with that. And then you get to this phase where Allah tabaraka wa ta'ala takes him in the Isra wal Miraj into other planes and other dimensions. And then after going to other planes and other dimensions, he goes to another dimension, another dimensional reality, which is separate from the garbage that we have on the planet Earth that we human beings engage. And he has to come back down after talking to the prophets, after encounter with the divine. He has to come back down, right back, to deal with the problems that are there he has to face. And that issue remains, and it maintains until he finishes his mission. But one of the things that you see is that the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he didn't leave Salatul Tahajjud. He didn't leave that conversation with Allah on the intimate. And that's not easy to achieve. It's like, once you go through a diet where you're just eating junk food, and then we try to give you some veggies, some raw veggies, it just tastes nasty. Your body just rejects it. And that's how the spiritual dose is. The spiritual dose is, people, is not going to come overnight, but you have to put it in your framework for your own survival. Things are extremely hectic. They're extremely hectic. And see, disengaging completely becomes it's not a real option. It's not a real option for those who understand what's going on. And so it's like, as you're getting bombarded with so many things from so many different directions, you have to stop and be just with yourself. Even if even if you have to cry and release. Some of us go through that whole struggle of, we know we need to cry. We know we need to release. You just can't. It's just not the right time. The body just doesn't allow it. And so you have to pay attention to what goes on in that body of yours. That's part of you. And you have to give that time. But giving that time is not going to come, all right, now I'm about to give myself time. It's going to take time to really get to the time, because we're talking about quality time. And, I went over where I wanted to go, but I wanted to leave that there, put it there, and just say that, we won't be able to get into the next phase. We're 20 years into the 21st century. And to be honest with you, it's chaotic. We won't be able to transform and go to the next phase if we don't do this work. I don't know about you. I know that it's difficult. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.